what I hold in my hands for some of you is going to be just a walk down memory lane. It is going to be a drive down nostalgia avenue. It is going to be a flight over the mountains of childhood stuff that's in your brain. And for some of you, this is going to be something brand new that you've never seen before. But either way, I'm so excited to talk about this. Spire Christian Comics. Do you remember these? Do you? Because I do, and I can't wait to talk about them. Hey, I'm Ben Avery. This is Strangers and Aliens, where we talk about and explore that cross-section between faith and fantasy, spirituality and science fiction, Christianity and creativity. And these comic books that I'm about to get into right now, right here, these are foundational for me in being able to take that spiritual side and that creative side and merge them into one. And I am telling you right now, there are things that I have done with my life that I might not be doing with my life if I hadn't had these examples set for me of Christian creativity. Spire Christian Comics, almost exclusively with a couple of inputs from other people, by Al Hartley, who is just, he's not someone that I would necessarily think of as the first person when someone says, who's someone who has inspired you? I mean, obviously C.S. Lewis is one, J.R.R. Tolkien is one, Isaac Asimov is another one, Ray Bradbury, George Lucas. These are all names I can rattle off real quickly, but I would never think, and I always forget, Al Hartley has a very, very special place in my childhood when I was very impressionable and just figuring out who I was. Because, you know, most people who are a part of doing things that are creative discover that they liked doing it when they were very young. And depending on how broad what they did was, they're going to start doing it when they're very young as well. Like drawing or writing. Those are things that are broad. Now, there are some things that aren't quite as widespread that you discover maybe when you're older, but you're going to recognize that proclivity toward creativity when you are young. And so these are some comic books that I had in my collection, sort of. We'll get there in a moment. But first, I do want to mention our sponsor for this video. Our sponsor is Onward and Upward Publishing, featuring the book Ghosts of the Future by Ben Avery. Go to benavery.com. Okay, I know. But I do want to remind you, you can go to benavery.com because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about that I've worked on are available at benavery.com. And so some of the comic book things, there's some really interesting parallels that I hadn't even thought about between Al Hartley, who definitely had a career that was far broader, further reaching. I am not by any way comparing myself to Al Hartley, okay? He did a lot of different things over a long period of time. He worked for publishers in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, and the 80s. I mean, this is a man who did a lot of things and did a lot of work. But before I get into that, I do want to talk about just why I'm doing this and why I'm holding this stack of comics right here. I got a call at church. Phone rings, I pick it up, it's the front desk, and they say, hey, there's a call for you, it's so-and-so. And I said, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to talk with her, because and the front desk person didn't know what they wanted. But you know, I'm still gonna take the call. I mean, I'm the children's pastor, right? And she mentioned that she had some things from her brother that she was trying to get rid of. And usually when someone calls a church and says, I've got these things that I want to get rid of, it's because they have these things that nobody wants, nobody ever would want, but they just can't bear to throw away because they're not wasteful people. And so they're like, well, we've got all of these thread spools with no thread. There's 179 of them. Would you like them for maybe a craft or something? Anyway, she says, well, actually, I wanted to talk with you because don't you do something with comic books or something? I'm like, yeah, okay, this is interesting. Where's this going? And she says, well, I have a stack of comic books that I'd like to give to you if you want them. And I said, well, what do you got? And so she says, well, I just wanted to give these to you. I wanted to gift them to you. They're Spire Christian Comics. And then she really had my attention. And I was just, are you serious? And she said, yes. And she said, you know, we only live 5 minutes from the church. Do you mind if my husband just comes on over? And I said, well, I got a meeting in 15 minutes. He'll be there in 5. I said, okay. So he comes and he hands me this stack right here. And when I was on the phone with her still, I was like, I haven't even seen these, and you just taken me on a walk down memory lane. This is so cool. Thank you so much for thinking of me. And so he brings me this stack of comics. I go to my meetings. It's a Tuesday. It's meetings all day, basically, on Tuesday for me. And I have 2 different staff meetings. I have one-on-ones, that kind of thing. And so I finally get home with this stack of comics and start looking through it. And oh man, I was back in 1979, 1980 in the little house in the woods in Sunbridge, Ontario. And I was just, I can remember laying on the floor reading some of these comics. Now, there are some that are not here that I really, really love. And when I was talking to her on the phone, I told her this story as well. I said, thank you so much for doing this, because this is just a memory that I have from when I was a kid, because I got rid of all of them. Every single one of my Spire Christian comics that I had, I got rid of them at a garage sale. I think they were purchased for $5, maybe $10. But anyway, this took me back to those comics that I got rid of. It was so exciting to sit down and open these up. And again, like I said, it just took me back. I felt like I was on the floor. I did not lay down on the floor to read these. And I still haven't read all of them, but I did. There were a couple of them that I picked up and started reading right away. Let's talk about Al Hartley real quick before I get into this stack of comics and kind of get into the Spire Christian Comics history that they did. He lived from 1921 to 2003. And he, in high school, was always into art. His parents were politicians, or his father was a politician, but his father supported him in whatever it was that he wanted to do. And he was really into art. And he did some work on things during high school. He actually did work on a comic book or 2 before he enlisted in the Army for World War II. He actually flew 20 missions, 20 B-17 bomber missions in Europe. And when he came back, he went back to art, and he started doing work on comic books. In 1949, he joined Timely and worked with Stan Lee, on a number of different things, and even before Marvel. So he worked on lots and lots of different styles of comics. He only did a couple superhero things. He did an issue of Thor, that it was Journey into Mystery number 90. And that is something I really want to track down and see. That's the issue that he drew. He drew an issue of Thor. But he did write 2 issues of superhero comics. He wrote an issue of Iron Man and Giant Man in 1965. And so I'd also like to see about tracking those down and seeing if I can read those. And I'm actually going to check the Marvel app to see if I can read these comics without having to buy them at collector's prices. So anyway, in 1967, he became a Christian, and that was when he had to actually step back from some work that he was doing for adult magazines. And that was just something that he could not reconcile. And I mean, understandably so. And so he stopped doing that and went to work for Archie and was writing and drawing for Archie Comics. In the meantime, he got connected with Rebel Publishing, and they had him work on 3 comics. They had him work on God's Smuggler. They had him working on The Hiding Place. They had him working on The Cross and the Switchblade. And these 3 books were done as, I think, kind of a one-off kind of relationship. And these comic books, they were all pre-existing books, and they were all biographies. And I did see on eBay, because after getting this stack of comics, I had to say to myself, you know, there's a lot here that I just don't have in my hand. Is this something that I could collect all of them of? And I have said to myself, please, Ben, don't do this. Don't do this to yourself or to your family. And we'll see what ends up happening. Maybe there'll be an update episode of that. But anyway, I did find that there was actually a graphic novel collection of those 3 comics from Rebel. And so anyway, he started working with them on that. And out of that sprang Spire Christian Comics. And it was a partnership between him and Fleming Revel, or whatever it is that that publisher was called. And in the course of that relationship, there were a few dozen comic books that they did. And like I said, they're almost all exclusively Al Hartley. Now, I'm not sure how much of a studio he had working with him. I do know that as far as the credits go, the writing, scripting, and the art is all him. Now, he may have had some inkers working with him, but I don't know. I really don't know if he did or not. There are a couple times when he was working with someone else, and that's because he was, it was a example of taking a pre-existing book and turning that into a comic book, or taking someone's testimony and turning that into a comic book. And we'll get into that in just a second. But in the course of doing this, that's where he had the idea of Archie. And when he was working for Archie, was actually kind of putting some of his beliefs in the stories that he was writing and drawing. And the publisher asked him not to do that so much anymore, and so he didn't. But he did, when he started working for the Spire Christian Comics label, he did contact the publisher of Archie and say, hey, I'd like to do this. And the publisher of Archie was Jewish and appreciated what he was trying to do and wanting to do and gave him permission. And so there were 19 different Spire Christian Comics that were Archie. So I've got a few of them here. Archie's Parables, Archie Gets a Job. I mean, they sound like the kind of thing, Archie's Car, sound like the kind of thing that would be just published out there as a regular Archie comic. There's Archie's One Way, Archie's World, Archie's Sunshine, Archie's Festival, Archie's Love Scene. I remember this one. Jughead's Soul Food. So Jughead did get one. And let's see, Archie's Clean Slate, Archie's Family Album. And these I remember especially Archie's Parables. And actually Archie's Parables might be in one of my boxes somewhere. I might not have sold this one because I loved this one so much. And part of it was just because it was so weird and unique. It is different genre of stories. And there's this one here where Archie puts on some weird armor there. And, but all of them end with, just these ideas and a little blurb at the end, just saying, here's what this story was kind of about. All these stories are basically running under the assumption that Archie and most of the gang are believers and they are dealing with things in the real world. And there were 19 of these. I don't know how many in my hand right now. Now, there were other things as well that they did, and that was, one of the things they did was Bible stories. And so I have a couple here. Here is Live It Up, which is a modern adaptation of the parable of the prodigal son. And, as original as I'd like to imagine that I am all the time, the current project that I'm working on, which is a follow-up anthology, a follow-up to A Time for Everything, is about Jesus's parables set in fantasy and science fiction settings. And this is the same kind of thing here, where it's the parable of the prodigal son in this setting, this modern 70s setting. And very 70s, very 70s. Far more, Archie is a lot more timeless, still of a time, but it's that 50s timelessness. This is 70s, and I just want to say, as dated as the 50s can be, I feel like the 70s is even more dated and less timeless. From this stack that I have here, there is also Jesus and Paul, and I'm just, again, thinking, wow, this is funny because, I wonder, without this, would there have been this? This made a big splash, and it was everywhere. I remember it being in every single bookstore that you would walk into, a Christian bookstore, I should say. And it would just be there. And it was there for years, even after they stopped publishing these. It was still there because they weren't returning them because they were mom and pop small Christian bookstores and they wanted things on that spinner rack that they have or whatever. But I also remember going to churches and seeing these in youth rooms in churches and that sort of thing. And so here you have me following in Al Hartley's footsteps. And then you have Paul. Now this biblical adaptation with biblical setting, biblical adaptation with biblical setting. 12-issue miniseries. I call it my Watchmen because it's 12 issues and there's some backup matter and stuff. I'm not going to get into that right now. But modern day, I love the subtitle. Paul, Close Encounter of a Real Kind. Well, what do we have here? Paul, sci-fi Paul, but just like this, which is, this is more 70s. This is definitely of that 70s thing. But yeah, here I am taking the story of Paul and putting it into another setting. And Yeah, so anyway, I'm not going to say that Paul directly influenced that Paul at all. I didn't have this comic book, but I did read it just recently after I got the stack of comics. It is actually really interesting, and in some ways, it feels like an alternate history because of the look and style of that 70s, but then it's still talking about things as if it is, here he's going to the Philippians and he's doing this, but he's escaping in a helicopter, But then as you can see on the cover here, you've got these are the Romans, but they look like they are, from some sort of liberation front or something like that. And so that was another Bible story that they had. The ones that I miss and just felt so nostalgic for as I was reading these, I had Noah's Ark, and that was also done kind of in a cartoony modern setting. And I just remember Noah looking like just he was old and dumpy, and he wore overalls. But anyway, Adam and Eve was also set in a modern 70s setting. And I do find it interesting that Jesus is not in that setting. Adam and Eve was interesting because the way that they portrayed the serpent was as a man. He was just this kind of hippie-ish biker guy wearing a leather jacket, and I think he had a cowboy hat. And he just comes in and he starts telling them to sin, and of course they do. And then when he's cursed, he turns into a snake, and it was a really cool sequence. This is one that I wasn't sure where to categorize it, and that's there's this one, Crossfire. I don't know if this is a real story. I tried looking it up. It's about a cop named Matt Simon, and so I tried looking up Matt Simon, Crossfire. It didn't bring anything up, except for there's a guy named Matt Simon who did a documentary project called Caught in the Crossfire or something like that. So I don't know if this is a true story or not, but this kind of leads into that next setting, which is the books and true stories that comics were based on. There was a set of comics also of 9 young readers, and it was Barney Bear or something like that. And then there's another one called God Is. I remember my sister having that, and I think she had the Barney Bear comics as well. A couple of them, not all 8 of them. And then there were some adventure comics, and I never had any of these, but the Brothers, Adventure with the Brothers. Actually, I must have had these because I remember, I haven't read this one, but I do remember that their last name is Brothers, and it's one of those comic book, not just comic book, but one of those name coincidences that you get where you have a fictional character with a name that really, really describes who they are. So at any rate, actually looking at this now, opening it, I think I might have had this one. But there were 3 Brothers comics. There was the Barney Bear comics, and then there were these comics that are based on true stories, based on books, based on movies. Crossfire, I can't figure out where that fits into any of these kind of categories because I don't know if it's a true story. I don't know if it's based on something. There is nothing in here to indicate what it was based on. It just, Al Hartley's name is on the cover, and there's the title here, Crossfire, but they don't really do a credits page because it's Al Hartley. He's the credits. So, but it's about a cop who puts himself on the line every day and actually also puts himself out there to help the people that he's arresting and help the people that he's taking to jail because he wants to see them find life with Christ. It's, again, very 70s. But anyway, getting to that last category and just allowing Crossfire to be kind of its own thing. It's the comics based on books, especially biographies. There's a lot of biographies that Al Hartley did. And one of them was The Hiding Place, which I didn't have this when I was young. I did read The Actual Hiding Place, which if you went to a Christian high school or middle school, The Hiding Place was probably a book that you read. In fact, the year I read it, I was reading it as a biography for my freshman English class, and she almost didn't let me read it because I believe they read it in their 8th grade class as a class required book. But I didn't go to that school in 8th grade, and so she did give me permission to read it for my freshman English class. There's another true story, God's Smuggler. I had that one. I was really kind of hoping to be in the stack here, but that's Brother Andrew, and I will never forget that cover, and that cover has stuck with me because it's so powerful, the message it sends, which is him doing that famous prayer where he says, Lord, I know you've made blind eyes see. Now I pray that you would make seeing eyes blind, because in his trunk he had a bunch of Bibles that he was taking across the Iron Curtain. And so that was God's Smuggler by Brother Andrew. Born Again, Chuck Colson, I had that. I didn't understand really what I was reading, the significance of it, partially because I was 7, maybe 8. I also will never forget the comic I had, Hello, My Name is Johnny Cash, that Al Hartley did, based on Johnny Cash's book, Hello, My Name is Johnny Cash. And then there was Into the Presence of Mine Enemies, which that was another comic that I read over and over, and it's really stuck with me. It's about a prisoner of war in Vietnam. I don't have that comic, but I did end up tracking down the actual book because I really wanted to read that story again. And it's a powerful, powerful story about a man whose faith basically brought him through. The interesting one to me that I was reading from this stack that I had not read is called Attack. And this is the true story of Mitsuo Fuchida. And now I don't know exactly how the storytelling relationship worked between Mitsuo and Elizabeth Sherrill and Al Hartley, but Elizabeth Sherrill is on the cover there because it's by Mitsuo Fuchida as told to Elizabeth Sherrill and Al Hartley. But this is a true story about a man who was coordinating Pearl Harbor. And so that's why he survived Pearl Harbor, is because he coordinated it and returned and was a war hero. And then when they lost the Battle of Midway, that was a huge, huge problem for Japan. Okay, Ben, past Ben, sorry to interrupt you, but you completely left out some of the coolest parts of his story, and I don't want to get into all of it, but I do want to remind you, past Ben, that another part of his story was that he was one of the investigators sent to investigate the Hiroshima ground zero, basically, and he was one of the few investigators who did not develop radiation poisoning during that time, and he just had an amazing life, and it's an amazing story. And I do want to find out more about this man because of this comic book that I had never read before. I had only seen it on those ads on the back of those Spire Christian Comics, which definitely, it helps pique the interest, you know, seeing those covers on the back. But reading his story definitely piqued my interest to find out more about the real man. So, past Ben, I'll turn it back over to you, but you really didn't do a very good job of telling this guy's story, and he deserves to have his story told well. So he then ends up hearing from a prisoner of war who had been a prisoner of war in Japan with the Japanese camps, and how this guy's testimony just touched Mr. Fuchida, and he became a believer. And this is a great little story, and I want to find out more about this man and find out more about his story. But yeah, this is a pretty touching comic book. Beyond that, there was In His Steps was another one that's based on a fictional book. There's a book or a comic called Time to Run, which is based on a movie that might have been based on a book, or it was based on a book that was based on a movie. I don't know the relationship. The comic book didn't come first. That's what I know. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Whatever it was, chicken, egg, it wasn't the comic book. Another one that he did was called Gospel Blimp. And then there was another one that was really scary to me, and that was There's a New World Coming by Hal Lindsey, which was about the end times. I remember being sick and not going to church, or maybe my mom was sick. Maybe I wasn't sick because I was up and about. I was running around. But not going to church one Sunday and reading that comic. And having lots and lots of questions and talking with my mom about the end times and about this comic that I read. And then later on in life, in junior high or senior high, I can't remember which, my dad had the actual book, There's a New World Coming, and I read the actual book. And yeah, it's interesting to read end times predictions from the 70s and 80s, like 88 Reasons Why Christ Will Return in 1988, and its sequel, 89 Reasons Why Christ Will Return in 1989, because he didn't return in 1988. Fun little story. On one of those 3 days that book was predicting that Christ would return, my band teacher at a Christian high school was desperate to take all of the horn section out into the courtyard and blast the horns just to, troll the rest of the school. He didn't do it. He valued his job. But anyway, Mr. Moeller, if you're watching, I remember. Do you? It was fun. He was one of my best teachers, too. He really encouraged me to follow up on my creativity and to, he signed my yearbook and said, "You're so creative, keep it up," or something like that. So anyway, Mr. Mueller, this video is for you. And for Al Hartley. And for the lady who gave this to me. So anyway, there is one last comic that I wanted to mention, and that was Alpha and Omega, which was actually kind of a science fiction retelling of the book of Job, and I think Adam and Eve and Revelation. I'm not exactly sure, but I think there's kind of a mixture of all that stuff. Maybe Jonah, maybe not Job, maybe Jonah. I don't remember. My friend had it. I didn't. I read it once. I loved it. But anyway, this was just so much fun to just step back and read some new comics that were actually, I was surprised by, and then read some old comics that I'd already read before. And if I'm going to say, you know, is it worth reading? Yeah, it sure is, man. So without that stuff, would we have Armor Quest? I don't know. Probably not in the form we had it, because Armor Quest came out of a group of Yahoo email groups, Christian Comics. There's 2 of them, and they were kind of variations on Christian Comics and Christian Dash Comics. I don't remember which was which or how they all worked out, but that's how I met Sherwin. That's how I met Sherwin, who is the artist on this book. That's how I got together with Mike Miller, which is how I got to work on the Hedge Knight. And all of us, or many of us in that group, were inspired by these comics. So much so that some of the people who were part of that group created a Christian comic book award called the HARTLEY. I never won one. I don't even remember who did. I don't remember much about them. I just remember them happy. But anyway, those groups were inspired by these comics, by this man. And so Al Hartley is not with us anymore. If he was, I wish I could shake his hand and thank him. But I don't think I need to. I think he knows that there were a lot of people who were inspired by him. So that's it. That is this episode. I want to thank you for spending this time walking down with me down that old memory lane. And until next time, join us on Facebook at facebook.com/strangers and aliens, where you can hear about new episodes. And Evan's constantly posting memes. Sometimes I post a meme. Mine are funnier. I'm just throwing it out there. You can also follow us on YouTube at youtube.com/strangers and aliens. And of course, you can go to our website, strangersandaliens.com, where you can subscribe to our podcast. And you can subscribe to our podcast wherever you subscribe to podcasts, Apple Podcasts or whatever it might be. And yeah, and you can also go to benavery.com, where you can buy things like Armor Quest or Ghosts of the Future or Peter and Paul in space. Oh, and of course, the Christ. And so, until next time, thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for walking down memory lane with me. I think I've said that 4 times too many, but I just said it again. And until next time, Godspeed.